Live from the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in beautiful downtown Raleigh, it's the Science Cafe with your host, Chris Smith.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for being here at the Museum of Natural Sciences this Thursday night. We're going to have a fun evening tonight talking about stuff that can kill you. That sounds... but no, right? Okay, I'm glad some people laughed at that at least. But that's a pretty good topic, right? Tonight we're going to be talking about poisonous plants. And yeah, things that can maybe mess you up a little bit. So I'm glad that you're all here tonight to learn about them so that you can learn to avoid them. Or maybe not avoid them so much as maybe just don't eat them. But you can definitely gain a new appreciation for tonight's topic, right? So I'm glad that you're all here. We're going to learn something new. Our guest tonight is Director of Conservation at the North Carolina Botanical Garden. Anybody been? Visited NC Botanical Garden? That's fantastic. This is terrible, haven't been. Right? Right? I actually have not visited, but I was talking with Johnny Randall, and I asked him about this photo on his title slide in particular, because I was like, why is there a gate at the Botanical Garden with a giant, scary spider web over it? And he just said, oh yeah, that's the entrance to the poisonous plant garden. Makes sense, right? They want to let you know, don't harvest your salad, I guess, at the Botanical Garden. And if you're going to do that, don't do that. But if you're going to do it, don't do it in that part of the garden, I think. So I've not been, but I do love plants. My own yard is full of lots of native southeastern plants. I like the bugs, I like the birds, and I like all of the great colors and the gorgeous flowers and plants that we have that grow right here in North Carolina and in the southeast that we can plant in our gardens. And I know that the North Carolina Botanical Garden is also doing a lot of incredibly good work thinking about studying, researching, and protecting and preserving the plants that we have here in this great state, because North Carolina has incredible diversity across all of its flora and fauna. But tonight, we're going to dive into the flora. Are you ready to get started? Let's do it. Put your hands together and welcome to the stage, Johnny Randall. Oh, we're almost ready.
Okay, well, thanks for coming out tonight. This is going to be fun, I hope. I did want to say something about that poison garden and botanical gardens. The original botanical gardens were built around being physic gardens, and that means that they were concerned with drugs and poisons. So we'll be talking about some of those tonight. So that goes way back with botanical gardens. So we'll just get started. So this is the outline for tonight. What is meant by poisonous plant? Why do plants have poisons? I won't read all these slides. I think most of you can read. And I tend not to read slides. But I am curious how this pointer works. There we go. All right. So it is quite magic. So just what is a poisonous plant? And this is a definition that I found, guess where? On the internet. A poisonous plant is defined as a plant that when touched or ingested in sufficient quantity can be harmful or fatal to an organism, etc. I'll let you read the rest of that. What I'm going to talk about tonight are primarily plants that are ingested and that have chemicals that will affect you internally. I will not talk about things like poison ivy or things that cause dermatitis, although we can talk about those during the question and answer period. But that's not what my talk is concentrated on. But also I wanted to point out that you can look up poisonous plants on the internet, and you can see that I did a Google search for plant poisons and poisonous plants, and you can see that for some of those, there are millions of hits. So after having poured through most of those, I was able to put together this presentation. So why are there poisons in plants? These are the ones that I'm going to concentrate on tonight, which are the ones that when taken internally can cause problems, like terpenes and resinoids, alkaloids, tannins. So why do you think plants have poisons? Okay, we have, so they don't get eaten? Yep, keep insects from eating them. Anything else? Well, keeping animals in general from eating them? No, that's exactly right. Plants do not want to be eaten for the most part. They want their fruits to be eaten, but only when they're ripe, because ordinarily a fruit, when it's green, is not tasty if you've ever tasted an unripe fruit. So plants usually have fruits that change color when they are ripe and are tasty, but they don't want their leaves eaten. So a number of these chemicals have been developed because of that. But I did want to point out that there are some other things that aren't necessarily poisonous but can cause great harm if you do ingest them. And these are the ones that are derived from calcium oxalate. So they're like, you've ever eaten a pear and know that grit in there is calcium oxalate. And it's a druce inside the pear. Then there's some plants that have like little needles in them that make your throat swell up and you can't swallow. And you'll find that those plants aren't eaten very often by predators, by herbivores. So yes, indeed, most wild plants have chemicals that are untasty. But humans learned long ago to solve this toxicity problem, but it was by trial and error. And this is a story that I found about some Australian explorers, European explorers, that were ignoring the natives of Australia about certain plants, and they were eating them and they were dying. And so finally, they did listen to the Aboriginal people, and they have to go through this elaborate process of detoxifying these plants that they have learned to eat. They needed to learn to eat them because that's what they survived on. But it's very complicated oftentimes to detoxify a plant. I just went to our botanical garden library one day to see what sorts of plants we had, or books we had on poisonous plants, and there was half a shelf full of these reference books. So you can find lots of information on these at your local library, if you ever go to libraries anymore, and certainly, like I said earlier, on the internet. So the first group of plants I want to talk about, or poisons I want to talk about, are the alkaloids. And so I won't talk about morphine, caffeine, or nicotine, but these are all alkaloids that we are particularly familiar with. So morphine comes from a poppy, and there's certainly derivatives of that, opium, etc. And that can be quite harmful. Caffeine is a stimulant. It's also an alkaloid, but one that we like to ingest oftentimes. And nicotine, similarly, is an alkaloid. But these are ones that mostly affect the heart and nervous system and can really be toxic. The alkaloids are particularly dangerous. Examples that we have around us are monkshood and boxwood, poison hemlock, crotalaria, which is in the legume family, delphiniums, Dutchman's breeches, yellow jasmine, which is pictured there. That's actually the arbor at the Coker Arboretum on the UNC campus, which is part of our botanical garden, and yews and lupins. So there's lots and lots of plants that utilize alkaloids as poisons. One that many people are familiar with is pokeweed. Raise your hand if you've ever eaten pokeweed or poke salad. Not many of you. But it's a common food that people will eat. Actually, I have eaten it after taking it through 3 boilings like it's set up here, but I'll bet that if back on the in the food service area, if they were serving poke salad and it had gone through 5 boilings, how many of you would eat it? A couple of you. Anyway, it's a plant that is I recommend avoiding, and because it can be quite harmful. You see that on these leaves, there's lots of places where an insect has eaten that pokeweed. So do you think those insects died? Raise your hands if you think those insects died. Well, actually, they didn't, because they have evolved to either use that poison and that protects them, or they become immune to that poison. But most mammals are not immune to pokeweed. And you can see from there that it has some pretty serious consequences if you do eat it. And then if you, I went to another site, and it talks about all the dangerous things about it, but it makes it sound like if you eat this plant, you are surely to die. And that's something to pay attention to, for sure. However, that's the first thing. Maybe you should not panic if you have eaten a plant that you think might be poisonous, but oftentimes those poisons will make you vomit, which is a good thing because our bodies are built that way. And one of the general recommendations, if you have been poisoned, is to induce vomiting. However, you should call 911, and we'll talk more about that later, or consult with a physician. But pokeweed is a serious toxin, and a number of people do eat it, either mistakenly or don't treat it carefully, the people who are wanting to take that risk. So Belladonna, which is a very weedy plant that occurs all over the world, was originally used, so Belladonna itself is Italian for beautiful girl. And people it was given to women, and women would eat this because it's a vasodilator and would dilate their eyes. I guess maybe it is still attractive to have someone with black eyes, but that's exactly what they would look like. Their pupils would dilate completely. And if you've ever had your pupils dilated at the ophthalmologist, that's no fun. You can't focus on anything, so it's pretty oppressive to do that. But you can still get belladonna. People still use it for various and sundry ailments. And I was looking at the list of all of the things that belladonna can be used for, and there's tons and tons of things that the medicinal community will recommend it for, but I do not recommend it. It's a plant that can be quite dangerous. So poison hemlock, or water hemlock, is a European, mostly a European and Mediterranean weed, but it occurs all over the place around here. It's in the carrot family. The leaves, as you can notice right here, look a lot like a carrot or parsley. So most of the things in this family have very similar flowers. They have very similar leaves. And almost everything in that family is poisonous in one way or another. If you ingest it, if you pick the leaf and you happen to get the sap on your hands and you rub your eyes, it can cause blindness or it can really burn. But parsley, carrots, cilantro, these are all in this carrot family, the Apiaceae. How is it that we can eat them without any problems? What's that? Well, we didn't necessarily evolve to eat them, but that's a good, that would have taken many, many generations of death, and you might not have gotten to reproduce before you. So any other ideas? Well, they don't have the toxins, and why don't they? We bred the toxins out of these plants, so human beings have selected for certain most crop plants are ones that were toxic at one time, but we have selected individuals that were not toxic. But I will say that that kind of selection does require someone to continue to eat it to see if it's toxic or not. And that's back, when you had shaman and things like that, they had people they could say, okay, let's try that, see what happens. So there was, but we don't do that so much anymore. We have other tests for toxins. Like I said earlier, most plants have evolved to have certain protection against predators, primarily herbivores. And you've probably heard of Socrates, who drank poison hemlock, and it's not our eastern hemlock that poisoned him, but rather this Conium maculatum, the poison hemlock. And this is a painting that was done of the death of Socrates when he chose to drink this in order to fulfill his punishment. Delphinium or larkspur, Adonis, monkshood, clematis, these are all plants in the buttercup family, Ranunculaceae. And again, most of them have very toxic qualities and in these alkaloids. So if you eat the seeds or the leaves, the roots, you're likely to have problems. Now, most of these issues most people don't go out and just eat wild plants. And oftentimes, when you do eat them, they taste bad and you spit them out, all right? So you don't typically ingest them. However, there are kids who will chew on something and become poisoned by them, or there's a dare, I dare you to eat this plant. That's ordinarily the way that poisonings occur, is from something like that. The Nightshade family is particularly notorious for having poisonous members. These are just some of the examples. But there are also common edible plants like peppers, eggplants, and potatoes and tomatoes that are also in this Nightshade family. And like with the parsley family, these are toxins that have been bred out of them. But these can cause very serious problems, and a lot of people have died from ingesting things in the Solanaceae outside of cultivated plants. One in particular, I will let you read this. This is from someone who reported on Jamestown weed, otherwise known as Jamestown weed. Again, this is a plant that is of European and Asian origin, but it's here as a weed, and you can find it all over the place. Very toxic, but in Jamestown, there was a rebellion, and the soldiers ended up eating this plant, and they became intoxicated by it. And so they were not very good at putting down this rebellion because of that. And the seeds of this are particularly toxic. It is a plant that some people will experiment with smoking. That is one of the most dangerous things you could possibly do, is to smoke the seeds of this plant. A lot of people have ended up in the hospital, and a lot of people have ended up dead by doing that, so not recommended. Rhododendrons. Almost everything in the Ericaceae, the rhododendron family, azaleas, mountain laurel, those are all toxic. These are my sons many years ago, where they are bathing in a sea of poison with these purple rhododendrons, but they did not eat any of them. Yes, it's dangerous. And even the honey that's made from the nectar of rhododendrons can be toxic. But the honey that's made from that nectar is very bitter, so most people don't eat it. But that picture of that honey right there, I just happened to find a picture of, it says Laurel Hill honey. So it's not made from laurels, but it could confuse people. But it is something that can cause serious heart problems. And this is one, I can't believe that this is still sold. This is one of the names I know it by is the precatory bean, but it's a Mediterranean plant. It's a legume, and lots of bracelets and necklaces have been made from this plant. And if you've ever seen someone chewing on their necklace, or accidentally some child chewing on this, a lot of people have died from this very toxic plant, even though you can still buy necklaces and bracelets made from this particular seed. So it's definitely one to look out for. It's red with a little black piece on it, so it's very poisonous. Then there are the glucosides. Well, let me back up for a second. One thing that I mentioned about the alkaloids is that these are secondary metabolites that are created by plants, or oftentimes called waste products. So they have no role in plant metabolism whatsoever. They are specifically designed, they're specifically made by a plant to prevent herbivory. Now, glucosides is a whole nother set of chemicals, and they're ones that are usually breakdown products through some enzymatic process that cause the toxin. So they're not directly created by the plant through some metabolic pathway, but rather they're breakdown products that go through some enzymatic activity for them to become toxic. And there's two primary ones, the cyanogenetic genetic ones and the saponic ones. The cyanogenetic ones are particularly dangerous. They're usually produce cyanide when you eat these. Hydrangea, cherry, and digitalis are common ones. And then the saponic ones are Buckeyes, lily of the valley, oleander, and black locust. And I'll give a couple of examples of these. But just a year ago, a friend of mine's dog was killed by eating lily of the valley. They found the dog just lying there on the ground with lily of the valley leaves in its mouth. So it is indeed very toxic. Beautiful plant, but deadly. Apples, they're in this family, the Rosaceae, but their seeds are full of cyanogenic acid or glycoside acids, so that produce cyanide. However, you would have to eat about 2 cups of ground up apple seeds to have any problem whatsoever. So there is a myth out there that eating apple seeds can be very dangerous, but most people don't eat the seeds. You would have to crunch them. There's no harm to swallowing them whole. And then you would have to eat a whole bunch of them for there to be any problem whatsoever. So apples are okay. But on the other hand, black cherry, the leaves especially, and especially after they're wilted, they are broken down by enzymes and are very toxic. And this is usually something that affects cattle who might browse on them, like a horse. So eating a mouthful of wilted black cherry leaves can kill a horse. So not something good to do. But there are insects, certain swallowtail butterflies, black swallowtails, that actually eat black cherry that aren't harmed, but makes them poisonous in turn to birds. So the seeds are also poisonous, but similar to apples, you would have to eat a bunch of those seeds. But the fruits are delicious of a black cherry. Buckeyes, which we have all around us, a lot of people carry them for good luck, and historically, it was they were used to ward off rheumatism, and that's kind of an ironic thing about them. The young leaves are particularly toxic, and the seeds, and they can cause all sorts of paralysis and even mostly just paralysis is what they can cause if you eat too many leaves of these Buckeyes. So who are you going to call if you're poisoned? Are you going to go on Facebook and post something like this person did? Said, my child ate these berries. You know, what are they? You know, why in the world would you go on Facebook and ask some random person on plant ID if this plant is going to be poisonous or not? So that's not the best place to go. There's another Facebook site on poisonous plants, but again, you know, there are probably better resources than going on Facebook, even to the poisonous plant section, because you're going to get recommendations from who knows who. I like this one on the right. They asked if this plant is poisonous, and then someone said, yes, probably, because it has, the fruit has a single seed. Well, there are lots of plants with single seeds, and I don't think that that is necessarily a key character for poison. So don't go to Facebook. There are legitimate places in North Carolina to get recommendations on what's going on. So there's some great websites, and you can just go on to sorry, I can't see that very well. Web poison control, but you're going to want to have the plant, you're going to want to be able to give a good description of it, and even take a picture of it if necessary that you can send them an image of, because it's very difficult. I mean, there are 4,000 native plants just in the Piedmont alone, okay? So that's a lot of plants for someone to have to recognize. So you definitely want to get a good ID on these. And these are just some of the, can't see that very well, but some of the information that you can get from this webpage. I recommend going there. But North Carolina Cooperative Extension is one of the best places to go. They have really good descriptions. They have really great pictures. So it's a place I do recommend for identifying things. But getting someone to, if someone is really sick, I mean, you don't go on the internet and trying to figure out what plant poisoned them. You take them to the hospital, right? So, in fact, a friend of mine, when I was in college, had made a salad of these fresh greens that she had collected, and she thought that she knew the idea of this plant, and I remember her throwing up for about 3 hours, and she didn't want to go to the doctor, and I figured since she was there was nothing left on her stomach after 3 hours, so I wasn't too worried about her, and she didn't go unconscious or anything. But still, getting to the doctor is really important. So, is this the end? I hope not for anybody who wants to go out and forage for wild plants, because the bottom line is don't eat wild plants unless a botanist or someone who absolutely knows what these plants are has identified them. I have friends who are mycologists who study mushrooms, and I was for a while collecting wild mushrooms, and they all said, never, never, never eat a mushroom that you have identified yourself. You always have to bring it to us first. And I have never eaten a mushroom that I didn't have them identify. So that's certainly the bottom line on eating wild plants. But there's lots of poisonous plants out there, and you do have to be careful. So thank you very much.
Let's give him a round of applause. All right. So the way Q&A works, if you've got a question for Johnny, wave your hand at me. I've got a mic. Katie's got a mic. We'll run the mics around the room. We'll get to as many questions as we have time for. If we haven't gotten to you yet, just keep waving at us, and we'll get to you as quickly as we can. So I'm going to scan the room, but I want the first one because you showed us lots of different groups of plants, and I'm curious about I guess maybe it's the phylogenetic relationship of these plant groups. Do you put a lot of these larger groups that have lots of poisonous plants in them, are they all pretty closely related if we look at the family tree of plants, or are we seeing different toxins showing up in really disparate groups over space or time?
Yeah, you'll find these toxins spread, especially the glucosides and the alkaloids. They're spread all over the plant kingdom. I chose the ones that we saw tonight because they're ones that you're most likely to run into around here. But yes, they are widespread, and they're very, very common toxins.
So given the frequency of plants that are poisonous, and I'm assuming that some of the things you said were poisonous to humans are also poisonous to other mammals, do common mammals, like just say a deer, have they learned what to avoid, or do they just avoid things that taste bad to them, or how do they keep from eating from this smorgasbord of poisonous stuff out there?
Some plants they will not eat because they do taste bad enough, but they have evolved to digest certain things for sure. But I think that if they were to eat a delphinium, for instance, it would cause, they would be affected by that.
So we eat a lot of eggplant, which is a nightshade. And occasionally it will provoke tingling in the lips and the throat and the mouth. So is that like a specific variety, you think, or is it a variation that's a throwback to a more poisonous variety or something?
I'm going to guess that you have a particular sensitivity to that. Like some people who are really highly allergic to poison ivy have a problem eating mangoes because they're in the same family. So a friend of mine is highly allergic to poison ivy, and if they ate a mango, they would get this rash around their face. So you're probably particularly sensitive to that. And there's still some low level of toxin in them that it hasn't been bred out.
How poisonous are daffodil bulbs, narcissus bulbs, and that thing that looks like an almond that's in the middle of a peach pit?
The peach pit, I don't think you're going to, it's more or less like a black cherry or an apple. It's in the same family, the Rosaceae. So you'd have to eat lots and lots of peach pits for that to be a problem. But as far as, what was the first plant you said? Oh, the bulbs. So yeah, daffodil bulbs, I'm glad you brought that up because those have those crystals in them, the calcium oxalate crystals, and they are, yes, a lot of plants with bulbs have those, and they'll make your throat seize up. In fact, Trilliums, and this was a story I was wanting to tell, be reminded of, thank you, but I was leading a group of Girl Scouts on a tour, wildflower tour, many, many years ago. And I knew that Trilliums had these calcium oxalate needles in them called Raphides. And just like Dieffenbachia, which is a houseplant, also called dumb cane, and it's called dumb cane because it will numb your mouth if you eat a little piece of the leaf. So I took a little piece of the Trillium leaf and thought it would numb the end of my tongue. Well, it got mixed in with my saliva, and I swallowed some of them, and I was telling these little girls that, now don't ever eat this plant, and their eyes got big, thinking I was going to drop dead out in the middle of the woods. But I learned my lesson about Trilliums, and if you'll notice, they tend not to be eaten by herbivores. or a daffodil bulb.
So I was interested that you have a poison plants section at the Botanical Garden. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about and how old it is and what you expect people do and how do you use that part of your garden?
So our botanical garden is mostly native plants, and it is a conservation garden, and we specialize on conservation practices there. But we also want to be a teaching garden, and so we do have non-native plants as well as native plants in the poison garden. But we chose to have common plants in the landscape that are poisonous so that people can learn what they are, so they can choose either not to have them if they have small children, or to avoid them if indeed they have them in their yard. So it's a holdover from the old physic garden philosophy.
What overlap is there between mammals and birds in terms of sensitivities to these substances? Because birds will eat berries that we wouldn't eat and don't seem to suffer ill effects.
Well, most fruits, when ripe, do not cause any problems. It's mostly if they're green and have toxins in them because of that. But a lot of times it's the seeds that is where the toxin is. Birds, fleshy fruits that evolved for bird dispersal, the fruits are tasty oftentimes, mostly, even though birds, they don't have a good sense of smell, they have a very good sense of taste. And the seeds are passed through their gut. So those plants with fleshy fruits have seeds that can pass through the gut of a mammal or a bird without being harmed, and therefore aren't toxic because of that.
I noticed on one of your slides you had Digitalis, which is a heart medication. So do you want to talk about how some of those, like Digitalis, can be poisonous but also helpful?
Right, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I meant to mention that. So Digitalis will indeed cause rapid heart rate. And so it is quite dangerous, but has been used historically for people with heart problems. So, but it's still something that you would want to have a synthesized version of that rather than taking the real thing. But yes, indeed, it was historically used for people with heart issues.
I was wondering about rhododendrons. So if you go to the thickets of North Carolina or even the backyard, you see nothing grows under it, really. It seems to act as its own herbicide. So are there other evolutionary uses of these poisons other than just not being eaten?
Well, yes, plants have ways of using chemical warfare against other plants. And that's called allelopathy. They'll exude these from their roots. So the most common is black locust. Mostly things don't grow under a black locust because of the chemicals that come out of the roots. But rhododendrons don't do that, as far as I know. I think what keeps the plants from growing underneath rhododendrons is that they put out such shade and they create a lot of duff, and also that those soils are really highly acidic, so they're not very rich in nutrients. So it's mostly the shade. I'm sorry? Oh, they create a lot of duff, organic matter under them when their leaves drop. So there's usually a thick layer of organic matter that other plants don't grow in very well.
Well, possibly, do you think they'll ever be able to use some of these plants to make like drugs that could be used against cancer cells to kill them off without harming the healthy cells?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Okay, do you think some of them could ever be used in pharmaceutical drugs that would just target cancer cells and kill them off without harming healthy cells? What's your opinion on that?
Well, that's a huge industry, is to look at the activity of plants against cancer. And so that's a whole world of pharmacology that is very active. And there are lots of plants that have very strong activity against cancer. But that is, outside of anything that I work with. And certainly, that people are doing that right as we speak. Someone in a lab looking for those magic bullets. And a lot of plants have certainly been targeted, have been used for that, for those drugs.
Thank you.
So when you were going out and picking mushrooms and had to take them, how many times did you get there and they went, ruh-roh?
I was pretty good at identifying them. So there was, I can't recall a time when, maybe once, I remember them saying that I had misidentified something and that it was a poisonous mushroom. But still, it's not something to play around with. The problem with a lot of mushrooms is that they taste good. The really poisonous ones can taste good, and you don't know that you've been poisoned until your liver has turned to mush. And then it's too late.
So I have one, and it's the plant that we all hate, but it's poison ivy. Is that considered poisonous? And what is that? Because plants that aren't ingested that are still really
right.
powerful.
I meant to point that out if I didn't, but I did want to talk about things that were mostly taken internally, but there are lots of plants that can cause dermatitis, and poison ivy is an allergic reaction, and you're allergic to the oils in that, in the toxin, and so you can take poison ivy internally and it doesn't bother you, but it will bother you at the point of entrance and at the point of exit.
That's really good to know. Thanks.
In fact, some people think that they can become immune to poison ivy by eating it. And I don't think that has been shown to be true.
Question about nettles. When I lived in England, the cook there made the most wonderful soup from young nettles. Are they the same nettles that are here?
Yes, we have similar nettles here. They're in the same plant family, but these are plants like a number of things that you have to take through some boilings to get rid of the toxins. There's a fern, bracken fern, that people will oftentimes pick the short fronds of that, but you have to take it through several boilings to get those toxins out of it. So it's something that, again, I don't recommend that, but it's something that people certainly do.
Unfortunately, I don't remember how she did it. Anyway, my other question is about bulbs, because I know after World War II, there were always stories about eating tulips, because basically the Hunger Winter, which was the winter of 1944, there was very little in Western Holland to eat, and people ate tulips.
I'll bet they were prepared, by going through some boilings to get those the crystals out, or to add some substance that would break that calcium down.
How toxic is English ivy?
Well, English ivy is another one that is poisonous if you eat it. It's also poisonous if you get it on your hands. Let's say you've been weeding it and you rub your eye. It can cause temporary blindness. So it is a toxic plant.
I just keep imagining myself getting lost in the woods and getting hungry and then just starting to pick things up and eat. Are there really good chances that that's a bad thing to do?
if you're starving and you're hopelessly lost,
Hopelessly. It's me we're talking. It's
I think there are some food. There's some things that you can eat, I believe, that will you'll feel full. They're not particularly nutritious. Like oak leaves, I think, are not that toxic, but they'll make you feel full. I do want to take it back. There are some. Certainly, wildcrafting is a popular thing for a lot of people to do, and there are wild plants that you can harvest and eat, but you have to be very careful about that. Yule Gibbons, many of you might remember him, he talked about harvesting wild plants. He did two things. A lot of things he took through several boilings. And he always cooked everything, it seems, in bacon grease. So I don't know if that has any special properties or not, but...
I guess maybe what I was really getting at thinking about it is how common are all of these poisonous varieties out of the, say, 4,000 you mentioned we have here in the Piedmont. Are a lot of these things containing variations of toxins, or is it actually a small percentage that have these defenses?
I can't really say for sure the percent that has serious toxins, but as pointed out, there are some families that are notorious, like the tomato family, the parsley family. But yes, I would say exercise great caution and look at and read Yule Gibbons. Get the pocket version when you go out in the woods next, in case you get lost.
I might mention, and perhaps you're aware of this, when I was in the Army, they had a process if you were in a survival situation where you go through and identify plants by first touching them with your fingers, wait a while, touch it to your lips, wait a while, put it on your tongue, wait a while, and if you survive all of that, you go to the next step and bite it, or then chew it, and eventually, if you feel normal, I guess you could swallow a little bit. But they always warn, don't pick something that's the only plant around you. Pick something that's very common.
Right.
Had you heard of this?
No, but that makes sense.
Yeah, this is a standard Army survival
right.
process.
Yep. So that would be, trial and error on a little bit at a time. But there are some plants that don't taste bad, that are highly toxic, that you could ingest. But I guess, again, this is a survivalist situation.
Hi. This is a kind of unusual question, but I wonder, has anyone ever studied the effect of mowing your lawn? Because like the last 4 or 5 years in the spring, I've started to get like a sinus cold in the spring. And I don't know if it's because of allergies but you think about it, when someone mows a lawn, they're creating this, they're like grinding up and vaporizing all these thousands of plants, and you can see the dust clouds and everything. I wonder if anyone has ever studied.
Well, there are some, like the really volatile chemicals in some plants, the terpenes and terpenoids, and things that you find in conifers. They're not really that great to breathe in or to ingest, even though you can make a tea with some of these. But it's usually the more volatile elements in those that are a problem. But probably when you're mowing your grass, it's nothing that's coming out of the grass, but you're kicking up all kinds of not only dust, but pollen that has fallen on the ground, and mold spores, and all kinds of things are getting kicked up when you're cutting that grass.
Let's give him one more round of applause. Thanks for coming out tonight.
And I forgot to do my public service announcement. How many of you have seen this new license plate that is hopefully coming out? Venus Flytrap. So it's essentially endemic to North Carolina. There's one population in South Carolina. The proceeds from this plate will benefit both the plant conservation program of the state as well as our Botanical Garden Foundation to give us money for conservation of these plants. But we have to get 500 people to fill out a form and to send in a check for $30. How many people have checkbooks still? Anyway, hopefully at least 500 people. But anyway, you can download this from the Botanical Garden website under Support Us. So if you want the most interesting license plate in the nation, go for that. Help us get to 500 so we can help support conservation in the state.
Thank you very much. All right. So let's see. Tonight's program on poisonous plants was actually the first in what is turned out to be a little short mini-series of spooky themes for the Halloween season. So we did poisonous plants tonight. Next Thursday night, we're going to talk vultures with the president of Wake Audubon. So come back. That's going to be a good one. All about your favorite birds that hang out with dead things all the time. Sounds cool, right? And then our last Science Cafe for the month of October is on Halloween night. So we have Roland Kays, museum biodiversity mammal expert. He's going to be on stage doing the science behind monster myths. So we're going to learn about witches, zombies, and vampires from a biodiversity expert. And I think you want to be here for that one. If nothing else, just to see if I show up in costume. Halloween night, you're going to want to be right here, 7 o'clock at the Daily Planet Cafe for the Science Cafe. Thanks for coming out tonight. I hope you learned something new and interesting, something to think about on the way home. Travel safe. We'll see you next time. Good night, everybody.